Okay, let's begin to talk about mood congruence. So the idea that when we're in a good mood, everything seems better, and when we're in a bad mood, everything seems worse. So really, it's a kind of a way of saying the mood that you're in, it puts sunshades on your face with different colors, right? And so you see the world through the colors of your mood. That's kind of the idea of mood congruence. The argument for why this might be the case that when we feel one way, it makes us look at the world through that lens, if you will, rests on the idea of associative network models. And we've spoken about something like this already when we talked about memory. So the idea is that mood sort of primes or activates information in memory that has the same valence. So information in memory that matches the mood that we're in. And therefore, there is something like a spreading activation through related concepts, through semantically related content of our memory. This would mean that recall and evaluation of our memory contents are congruent with the mood that we are in. So if we are in a positive mood, this would mean that we recall positive things and we evaluate things that we are putting into our memory in a positive way. And when we're in a negative mood, the opposite happens. So in a negative mood, we would retrieve from memory more negative information and evaluate information that we see around us as more negative as we store it in our memory networks. How could we go about studying whether this is the case, if mood congruence is indeed a thing? Well, here is one study that tried to use memory, as I've just explained it, to study mood congruence. So this is Bauer in 1981. And in this study, emotional events were recorded by participants in a diary for a week, and they were asked to rate each of these emotional events for how pleasant or unpleasant they were. And then here we had a mood induction through hypnosis. Who would have thought? Mood induction through hypnosis and made people feel either happy or sad. And in the lab, that is, of course. And then the question was, in the lab, given the happy versus sad mood induction, how many positive versus negative events would participants remember from the past week? And of course, we have the actual events recorded in that diary. So we have some factual basis on what really happened to participants. And we also have their perception of how positive or negative these events were at the time. Right? So now what we can do is we can check, first of all, is there a bias in what people remember? And then we can also ask ourselves, and how do the ratings change? So here is a graph of the results of this study. And what we see is, first of all, on the x-axis, the type of incident that was recalled. So there were unpleasant incidents and pleasant incidents. And the y-axis is, in this case, the percentage recall of these incidents. So and we have two lines. One of them is for participants who were put in a pleasant mood, so in a happy mood through this hypnosis, and the other is for participants who were put in an unpleasant mood. And what we can see is that in the pleasant mood, there's a greater recall of pleasant experiences than unpleasant experiences, right? So there's a lower line. You can see that for pleasant experiences on the right, we have a higher percentage of recall than for unpleasant experiences on the left. But the pattern was actually reverse for unpleasant mood. So for unpleasant mood, we found greater recall of unpleasant events rather than pleasant events. So that's the top line. You see there is a higher percentage recall for unpleasant events on the left and then for pleasant events that are on the right. So we have here an interaction effect between the mood that participants were in and the type of event, whether it was a pleasant or an unpleasant event. And this study would give us evidence for mood congruence because the more recalled memories are the ones that match the mood. So pleasant mood, more pleasant memories, unpleasant mood, more unpleasant memories. Next, let's talk about another facet of mood congruence. And this time, let's not look so much at what people retrieve from memory, but about how they construe situations that they're currently in. In this study that I want to show you as an example, male passerbys, just pedestrians, were interviewed on a bridge by an attractive female or male interviewer. And they were what was varied was whether this bridge was actually pretty fear arousing because it just looked creepy, or if it was just a regular bridge that where you wouldn't have to be particularly scared if you wanted to walk over it. And after this interview, participants were asked to take the thematic apperception test, also called TAT. And this is a test with ambiguous pictures. And people who use this technique think that it sort of taps into participants' responses by creating kind of a narrative. They make up, in these ambiguous pictures, they make up a narrative, and which direction this narrative takes can tell us something about their underlying motives or the way they view the world or the concerns they have. So basically, what is kind of like active in their mental processing. And this is a pretty widely used technique for trying to tap in what participants are thinking about. So this was one dependent variable, how they would interpret in ambiguous pictures. And another dependent variable was whether the participants wanted to call the interviewer for more information if they wanted to get in touch again with this attractive female or the male interviewer. Let's take a look at what the results of this study were. So first on the left, let's take a look at making up stories in the TAT in these ambiguous pictures that were somehow related to sex. So we can see in our plot on the left, there are two conditions: the control condition, that was the regular bridge, and the fear-inducing bridge, that's the other condition. And then we have in blue plots for the male interviewer. So assuming that the majority of participants, of the male participants, were heterosexual, this would not be a partner they would be interested in. And then in green, we have the female interviewer, assuming that most of the participants were heterosexual males, the female would be a potential partner for them. And so you can see that no matter whether on the control bridge or the fear arousing bridge, the after being interviewed by a female partner, the TAT was interpreted in a sexual direction by the participants more often when the interviewer was female than when the interviewer was male. But we can also see a big difference between the control and the fear bridge in that specific regard. So given that the interviewer was female, the probability that sexual imagery was kind of interpreted on the TAT was higher in the fear bridge than on the control bridge. So here, the idea is that this arousal of being on that bridge and feeling fearful was then sort of misattributed by the male participants as arousal that could be linked to the female interviewer. So, in other words, this would mean that information about affect, fear, arousal, feeling like something's going on that fearful versus control bridge, was attributed to a different object, in this case to the interviewer if they were female, and therefore a potential partner, assuming that our participants are largely heterosexual men. Now, we can also see a similar effect if we look at the probability that participants would call back. So again, we have, that's the plot on the right. Again, we have the control bridge and the fear bridge. And for the male interviewers, you can see there's a relatively low number of participants who wanted to call this interviewer back. And on the control bridge, female interviewers, they did get some more attention, but they got a lot more callbacks when the female interviewers, when participants were standing on the fear-inducing bridge. So again, this would be evidence for suggesting that here affect is used as information, and participants found the female interviewer attractive because they were in an aroused state because of standing on that fear-inducing bridge. And therefore, in this case, affect was used as information. So to summarize this and put it just in different words, so to make myself a bit clearer, the idea of mood congruence for using affect as information is that we interpret our feelings of whatever the feelings are as a reaction to what we are thinking and evaluating at the moment. So the heuristic here is basically, how do I feel about it? And it occurs that we misattribute our feeling to a different object of evaluation. So here, the bridge created some arousal, and instead of attributing arousal to just the bridge situation, the male interviewees misattributed this aroused feeling to the female interviewer, and therefore, as you can see, we're more likely to call back, and we're more likely to interpret ambiguous pictures in a sexual way. That's not the only study that's about affect as information. A similar idea was in this pretty famous study by Schwartz and Clore from 1983. Which we're going to talk about again in just a little bit, but for now, let's just bring it up as affect as information again. And here, participants were called for a life satisfaction survey, and they were called on a day that was either sunny or rainy. And they were asked whether they were happy with their life, and they had to rate this on a 10-point scale. So how happy are you with your life? Not so much versus a lot. And here the question was whether they would be happier on a sunny day, or if they would be happier on a rainy day, or if there would be no difference, right? And if affect was used as information, then this would mean that if the sun is shining, that makes me feel good. Let's presume that's how the average person in that life satisfaction survey feels about sunny weather. It just makes them feel good. And they might then misattribute this positive feeling to their own life when asked to reflect about it during this interview. And so this was the main bit. Participants were asked how happy they were with their life depending on the weather outside. But they were there was a follow-up condition. They were also either reminded about the weather or not. So they were either asked, how's the weather today? Or they were not reminded of the weather. Now, let's take a look at what the results were of this original study. Like I said, the idea here is that the current affect due to the weather would be misattributed to how participants felt about their life. But this would only happen if the weather was not mentioned. Because when the source of our mood is clear, people can correct for their bias. So if I know I am in a happy state because someone just gave me a compliment and I get to hang out with my friends and it just puts me in a good mood, then I know that this is the reason for my mood, and I'm not going to misattribute it randomly to something else that's going on. For instance, to being on the phone and being asked how good my life is. Okay, so if we look at the data, here we have two plots, one for where there's no weather reminder. This is where we would expect to see our affect as information effect. And then we have a plot where there is a weather reminder, where we would expect no such effect. So let's stick with the weather reminder for now. And you can see here, this is participants who were interviewed on a sunny day in blue and on a rainy day plotted in white. And their life satisfaction, that would be on the y-axis, is pretty similar in the condition where they were reminded of the weather and they were asked, how is the weather like today? When participants were not asked about the weather, that's the plot on the left side. We have in blue the people who were interviewed on a sunny day, and in white the people who were interviewed on a rainy day. And again, we have plotted on the y-axis the reported life satisfaction. And what you can see here is that in this study, people reported a higher satisfaction with their life if they were interviewed on a sunny day. So this would be evidence for our mood congruence hypothesis. This would be evidence that people misattribute current affect due to the weather on how they feel about their life.